Hey Kentucky, this is Mary Jo Perino. Tonight, it seems Twitter bots spread bogus messages on election night. Will Daniel Cameron eventually replace Mitch McConnell? And Mark Stoops heard from his 2020 recruits after that Tennessee loss. All that and more is next on Hey Kentucky. Welcome into Hey Kentucky. Republican consultant and all-around good guy Les Fugit is my co-host tonight. Welcome back.
Great to be back.
We got a lot to talk about today.
Let's get to it.
Twitter bots. I mean, what's a show
Everybody's
without
favorite
Twitter?
topic.
Yes. As we await the recanvass of the governor's race on Thursday, we begin with a couple of topics related to last week's election. First, a look at how online activity fueled Election Day. Talk of voting fraud. Are at a company that tracks political misinformation on social media, says a network of automated Twitter accounts suddenly sprung up as the final votes were coming in last Tuesday. The founder of VineSite says his company uncovered thousands of accounts with bot-like automated behavior that spread misinformation about the governor's race, including a screenshot of a tweet by someone claiming to have destroyed ballots with votes for Republican incumbent Matt Bevin. He has refused to concede the race on claims of unspecified voting irregularities. Les, I don't think he's meaning Twitter bots. I don't think that's what Bevin is, focused on, but This is not a surprise.
No, it's very frustrating as a guy who cares about the elections process to see people spreading misinformation. But at the end of the day, so much of the public doesn't trust anything that they hear that I would say the same thing on social media. If you don't trust an institution, why would you trust some random account on social media, particularly if you don't know who that person is? But what we really need to focus on is, did anything happen in our elections process that should cause concern? And right now, I haven't heard of anything. We'll have the recanvass on Thursday. If something shows up, we should pay attention to it. But if not, we need to move on and start the business of governing.
And I do think that Governor Bevin will be ready to do that if the recanvass doesn't show. I don't
think so.
He's going to push it much further than that. All right, turnout for last week's election well exceeded predictions. Unofficial totals showed more than 42% of Kentucky's registered voters came out to cast their ballot. That's 11% above what was projected. The national media is taking this as a possible sign that there will be a record turnout for next year's presidential election. The news comes even as though Kentucky has some of the most restrictive laws in the country when it comes to early voting, absentee voting, and the time the polls close on Election Day. One Louisville lawmaker sponsored a bill this year to allow 2 weeks of early voting and to keep polling stations open an extra 2 hours on Election Day. Democrat Morgan McGarvey says, I think our voting hours are ridiculously prohibitive. I don't know why in 2019 a person can only vote between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. on the first Tuesday in November. Les, talk about that for a second, but then also tell me about that. What do you think about that?
Well, I have been on the record for many years as supporting an expansion of voting times, allowing early voting. But let's not act like that's going to be the panacea for increasing, voter turnout. In fact, data suggests that that's not the case. It doesn't do anything. It might decrease in voter turnout, but it doesn't actually increase. But I do think we should kind of adapt to the modern times. We have so many more people working with odd hours that we need to be able to accommodate them so that they can vote easily.
I agree. However, I disagree with the national take that this symbolizes what's going to happen in any other election. I think this was a special one here.
Well, I don't know. I do think you may see some increased turnout next year because it's so polarizing, just like we saw that in this governor's race. It was so polarizing. So that could be something to watch.
All right. Well, now a look at how voting patterns have changed in Kentucky, demonstrating a real divide between urban and rural voters. Last Tuesday, Andy Beshear garnered more votes than Matt Bevin in only 23 counties across the state, led by big victories in Lexington and Louisville. It's a much different scenario than his father had in his victories, where Steve Beshear won 92 counties in 2007 and 2011. Now, when you compare this gubernatorial election with the one in 2015, the counties that moved most strongly towards the Democrats were central city counties of the major metro regions of the state and their suburbs. But some say this urban dominance doesn't serve Democrats well if they want to address rural poverty in one of the poorest states in the country. Les, I just think this is showing that maybe Democrats will just focus on those areas, and on the flip side, Republicans may stray away from the metropolitan areas.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest issues facing not just Kentucky, but all states that have dominant rural areas where Republican voters are concentrated in those rural areas, Democratic voters are concentrated in the urban areas, and we can't find ways to cross those divides. I think there's a lot actually in common with, say, for instance, a poor community in Eastern Kentucky and a poor community in West Louisville, but we aren't having those conversations. We usually break them down based on race or the fact that it's urban versus rural as opposed to the actual issues that we have in those communities.
Well, I think Hillary Clinton saw that as part of the reason why she wasn't successful in her presidential run, was she didn't go to some of those areas that Donald Trump then went to and was very successful.
You've got to talk to everybody. I think that's one thing we've learned in these elections.
Yeah. And it matters how you talk.
Absolutely.
All right. While some are wondering what a Matt Bevin loss means for Mitch McConnell's chances of re-election, others think voters may have elected his eventual successor. Daniel Cameron is the first black candidate ever elected as Attorney General in Kentucky and the first Republican to hold that office in 7 decades. He's also a McConnell protege, having served as the senator's general counsel. The 33-year-old drew praise from President Trump during a Lexington rally, labeled as a rising star in the GOP. CNN points to Cameron as a potential challenger to Andy Beshear for governor in 2023, or a possible replacement for McConnell whenever he decides to step down. I don't know what he's going to do next, Les, but Daniel Cameron certainly is a rising star. There's no way around that.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I think you'll see him, frankly, across the country stumping for candidates because he became part of the national conversation during this election cycle. But additionally, when you look at the rising political class in Kentucky, it's a bunch of young leaders, and Daniel is at the top of the list for that, and he's going to be speculated about for every office that comes open because he's so talented and such a smart guy. There's no reason not to consider him for some of those top positions.
Yeah, and I don't know that McConnell's specifically grooming him to take over for him as senator, but it's certainly something that I don't see not happening.
There are a lot of people that came out of the McConnell wing that he has, tried to help along the way. So he's just one of them.
All right.